Abraham de la Pryme was born in January 1671 at a house just off the high road from Epworth to Hatfield. A third-generation Huguenot, he was descended from the very first drainers of the levels of Lincolnshire and the West Riding of Yorkshire. He was baptised at the Flemish chapel at Sandtoft, and whilst his father spoke Dutch and his mother French, he knew only English, and so was part of the steady anglicisation of immigrant families from the Low Countries that led to the little Sandtoft chapel's closure by 1680. During his relatively short life, de la Pryme meticulously recorded observations about his local area, chiefly this area where we are today. And his earliest recollections date to when he was just 10 years old. During his student days at Cambridge, de la Pryme began to compile these observations into a regular diary that he maintained until his death. This diary has been a well-known mine of information about later Stuart England for over 150 years. Now, it was first issued by the Surtees Society in 1870 and republished in a fine and, I would say, frankly, extravagant facsimile edition by, of all places, the Epworth Mechanics Institute.
Dan, if you want to pass it around.
Absolutely, yeah. Feel free to circulate it. Yeah.
Didn't we on the way to?
Yeah. Oh, the Mechanics Institute.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, we can thank them for this edition.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, it's absolutely lovely.
In his diary, de la Pryme often assumes the role of domestic traveller, visiting places within a relatively narrow compass and recording what he encountered. Among his many remarks on what we now call archaeological finds and natural spectacles are references to his encounters with believers in ghosts, witches, and other supernatural phenomena. But unlike other High Church contemporaries, such as his friend Samuel Wesley of Epworth, de la Pryme was a marked sceptic of the supernatural. And so, this paper seeks to explore de la Pryme's attitudes and locate them within the politico-religious conditions of the post-revolutionary period, which was so helpfully sketched out by Bill before lunch. Okay, so de la Pryme recorded his thoughts on the supernatural from a young age. One of his earliest recollections was that as a child, his family moved into a house built by the Van Valkenburgs, which had stood empty for some time because of, quote, the great disturbances that there had been there by spirits and witches, of whom there are many dreadful long tales. But he added that he'd never actually experienced anything otherworldly himself. 10 years later, when studying at Cambridge, de la Pryme entertained a lively interest in magic. On one occasion, he visited Hall's bookshop and inquired after a text on the subject. The bookseller admonished him, warning the young man that he might raise the devil. The trader explained that a friend had recently lost his herd of cattle to witchcraft. Despite initially refusing to investigate further into the matter, curiosity eventually led de la Pryme to visit the farmer, who told him that he'd actually seen before his own eyes a witch transform herself into a beetle and fly away.
Happens.
This audacious claim, de la Pryme recorded in his diary in an uncritical manner of the documentarian. There's no additional commentary at this time. Soon thereafter, de la Pryme was struck by a personal tragedy that challenged his ostensibly scholarly interest in the arcane. During his first year at Cambridge, his friend Humphrey Bohan committed suicide. It was de la Pryme who discovered the body. For some time after the event, he wrote that his departed friend would often visit him in dreams. This already difficult blow was further compounded when de la Pryme received a letter from Bohan's father. Quote, he persuaded me exceedingly to desist from all magical studies, and lays a company of most black sins to my charge, which he said I committed by daring to search into such forbidden things. Now, this accusation could be explained away as the workings of grief, but evidently Bohan's father believed in the dark power of magic, and de la Pryme was sufficiently disturbed to desist from dabbling with it from that time forward. Now, 2 years later, in 1694, de la Pryme recorded at length a reputed case of haunting at the house of one Valentine Austin in Cambridge. This episode lasted for several weeks, and in de la Pryme's words, quote, it buzzed up and down the town. The spirit in question was something of a poltergeist, becoming more and more familiar here. It threw stones, created unearthly wailing sounds, the usual stuff. At one point, a Reverend Mr. Walker was brought into the house to pray, at which point a pot of paint was hurled in his direction, prompting the parson to preach on the subject in church the following Sunday. The episode only came to an end when a group of Cambridge scholars entered the house and drew pistols in the direction of the disturbances, not unlike Sample here at Epworth. When they threatened to fire on whoever or whatever was the cause of the disturbances, nothing further was heard after this challenge. Supposedly, Sir Isaac Newton passed the house at the very moment that the scholars rushed in and protested. Quote, "Will you never have any wit? Know you not that all such things are mere cheats and impostures? Go home for shame." This seems to have been a turning point for Pryme. The apparent exposure of the feigned haunting prompted him to write dismissively that, quote, "For everyone but old wives and other such like half-witted people never reckoned it to be anything else." Nevertheless, he did seek some second opinions, just to be sure. So after completing his studies, Pryme returned to the Levels, where he was appointed curate of Broughton, some 20 miles to the east of here. If we're to diagnose Pryme's churchmanship at this time, parallels can be drawn with Samuel Wesley. Like Wesley, he exhibited the hallmarks of a former dissenter turned zealous Church of England man. Whereas Pryme's father once entertained hopes that he would attend Glasgow University and become a dissenting minister, the diarist later described, quote, "the glorious Church of England as the best and most pure church in the whole world." Pryme's aversion to dissent is evident throughout his writings. For instance, he memorialised the death of Richard Baxter by commenting wryly that the old devil had given Presbyterianism, quote, "such root that it is to be feared that it will never be eradicated." Elsewhere, he referred to Quakers as damned heretics. Pryme traced the roots of these sects to the superstitions and enthusiasm of the upheavals of the Civil War. He remarked that during the Commonwealth, the clergy had become despised as the quote, "people grew perfectly atheistical," and likened Cromwell to Balaam the sorcerer, consulting with the devil in decisions he made. Now, quote, "The House of Commons are commonly a company of irreligious wretches who care not what they do, nor what becomes of the church and religious things, if they can but get their hawks, hounds, and whores, and the sacred processions of the church." Pryme's fears of a return to the disorder of the Commonwealth found their fullest expression in an entry of October 1696, and I'll quote it now. "Having been a little melancholy this day, I was very pensive and sedate. While I remained so, there came several strange thoughts in my heart, which I could not get shut of. Methought I foresaw a religious war in the nation, in which our most apostolic and blessed church should fall a prey to the wicked, sacrilegious nonconformists. Then will England be filled with all manner of confusion and horror, and shall stand like a drunken man many years, until that God have poured out all the wrath of his cup upon it." Oh dear. Moreover, this slippage into irreligion seemed more plausible to Pryme in a place like the Levels, which, notwithstanding his affection and inherent inquisitiveness about the area, he characterised as a place of superstition on the edge of civilised society. In February 1698, Pryme described the Isle of Axholme as a place only recently improved, both morally and spiritually. And I'll quote, "It was a mighty rude place before the drainage, the people little better than heathens. But since that, ways have been made accessible unto them by land. Their converse and familiarity with the country round has mighty civilised them and made them look like Christians." You get an impression of the man. Nevertheless, there was still work to be done for churchmen in North Lincolnshire. Pryme described Brigg as, quote, "plagued with dissenters because there was no parish church or chapel there, and recommended preaching courses or lectures on the model recommended by Archbishop Sharp of York." So from the time of his return from Cambridge, Pryme's attitude towards the supernatural appears to shift from one of scepticism to active opposition of those that he deemed impostors. His earlier interactions were marked by this scholarly inquisitiveness. In 1695, Pryme met a Norwegian gentleman on the road to Lincoln. They spoke of the economy, society, and religion. Pryme thought it commendable that the Norwegians, quote, "have none of our blind enthusiastics among them." He also asked his fellow traveller about witches, to which the answer came that he never saw any, nor heard but little talk of them. Around the same time, Pryme also made inquiries about Valentine Greatrex, the Irish stroker, or faith healer, by then dead for over a decade. And he received reports that Greatrix was, quote, a conceited fellow, believing strange things of devils, spirits, and witches, which seems to anticipate later assessments of Greatrix as an impostor or fraud. However, at his appointment as curate and reader of Holy Trinity Hull in 1698, Delaprime was prepared to take a more active role in exposing these so-called impostors. At that time, he was in correspondence with the religious controversialist Zachary Taylor, rector of Wigan, who was engaged in a heated print debate surrounding Richard Dugdale, the so-called Shuri demoniac, a case of demonic possession that was publicised by Lancashire Presbyterian. Despite the demands of a busy parish and being formally engaged by Hull's corporation to organise their historic records, Delaprime felt compelled to set aside his antiquarian studies to, quote, draw up something to quell this monster of the godly. Writing to Taylor, Delaprime portrayed dissenters and Catholics as equally deluded in supernatural matters such as demonic possession, and I'll quote, I'm very glad of that challenge that you give the papist priests and their brethren in iniquity about the existence of corporeal possessions in these latter days, not doubting at all, but it may be easily proved that they are all ceased long ago, as I have briefly endeavoured to show from the fathers, councils and divines of the Church of England. He went on to describe that demonic possession was no longer tenable since the end of the, quote, wonder-working age, which ceased in the Church with the power of the gift of miracles. This he claimed he could prove both from reason and the Church Fathers. He even went so far as to offer physiological explanations for the phenomenon. Again, I'll quote, the great ignorance of most men in the wonderful power of many distempers, as of epilepsy, nightmare, strong convulsions, consumptive long fastings and raptures, madness, hysterical fits, melancholy, and the power of speaking strange languages. And citing more recent instances, Delaprime claimed to show, quote, that there is nothing very strange or uncommon therein, but to any but country bumpkins. Oh, to me, that's real quite English. If he wasn't so far distant from Lancashire, Delaprime wished he could travel to examine Dugdale himself and put an end to the matter, but instead suggested the use of spies and underhand methods to catch him when drunk and expose him as a fraud. When Delaprime returned to the levels in 1701 after his tenure in Hull, he acted more vigorously against impostors. When a popular fortune teller visited his parish that year, he personally examined the young man for over an hour, discovering that, quote, he had told about 50 people in the parish that they should come to a sudden death, some be hanged, some be drowned, and he told several people the devil would fetch them, others that they should be bewitched, and named the witches, which were poor, good, harmless women. In a word, he has done incredible mischief in this parish and robbed the people of above £5. Delaprime wished that the young man had been whipped as an example to others, but alleged that several women of the town had come to his defence and helped him to flee. For Delaprime, equal to the politico-religious dangers posed by dissent were the folly and corruption of Jacobitism. As a teenager, he appeared to be acutely aware of where James II's religious policies might lead. Early entries in the diary record a palpable fear of ruin and physical violence. This wasn't sufficient, however, to dissuade him from a dalliance with Jacobitism in the experimental environment of Cambridge. For a short time, he attended meetings of would-be non-jurors and heard them pray for King James, later admitting, quote, I was once one of them myself until I was at length better informed. A decade later, at James II's death in 1701, and the declaration of the sovereignty of his heir by Louis XIV of France, Delaprime gave a more fully realised account of his views on Jacobitism to an unnamed correspondent. And I'll quote, I am very sorry that your sentiment on that prince is not the same as mine, for I think that I have more reason to believe him suppositious than ever can be brought to prove him real. And here we can again see that tension in Samuel Susanna. Abraham Delaprime, his correspondence, people are working this out at the moment. Here, Delaprime recited the old rumours about the illegitimacy of James, Duke of York, introducing precedents for supposititious pregnancies of Catholic monarchs, such as Mary I. And again, I'll quote it then. Why should you think it strange, then, that another queen of the same name should offer such a thing again? Was there not the same need? Was there not the same occasion? Was not the mighty Babel of Popery to be established now as well as formerly? Thereupon, as soon as they ever were well settled in the kingdom, the monks and friars and the rest of the bald-pated tribe begun to flung out many prophecies, revelations, and visions of a prince that should be born to the king in his old age. Upon the pillars of the kingdom should forever remain how the miracles were not ceased, and that God would now, as well as he had done of old, quicken dead flesh, and grant a child to their majesties, about the time that the sun should enter the tropic Cancer. Pryme dismissed other contrary depositions on the subject as coming from known papists, and therefore enemies of the church and government, or Protestants who were, quote, mere court weathercocks. And much like his active efforts to reveal impostors among dissenters, Pryme took every opportunity to denounce Jacobite visions and prophecies. Visiting with a Catholic gentleman in his neighbourhood, their conversation turned to the 1690s plots of Fenwick and Berkeley against the life of William III. In the course of this discussion, the gentleman told Pryme about an apparition he claimed to have seen of 6 men carrying a corpse, to which Pryme offered, ironically, to explain the vision, offering his opinion that the body he saw was that of the dead Plots, which incensed his host. Not good housekeeping. In the final years of his life, Pryme's interest in local superstitions seems to have waned in parallel with his growing commitment to antiquarianism and natural philosophy. This was facilitated in part by his access to the scholarly networks of the church, especially in the Diocese of York. In the summer of 1698, he took the opportunity of his ordination to the priesthood to present Archbishop Sharp with a copy of his History of Hatfield, to which the prelate responded warmly, though he remarked that Pryme could not prove some of his assertions, which were supported, quote, only by conjecture and probability. Pryme responded, quote, that was enough when nothing else was to be had. I think that's a familiar conundrum for medieval historians. Sharp, a noted numismatist, also asked Pryme if he had any ancient coins with him, and quite typically he had a pocketful, much to the Archbishop's pleasure. From 1700, Pryme's progress in the church went hand in hand with his scholarly work. He implored his ecclesiastical superiors for further preferment, explicitly to carry on his, quote, unfortunate studies. By this time, he'd begun a correspondence with Sir Hans Sloane, who communicated Pryme's observations in papers to the Royal Society. In early 1702, he even sent Sloane a vial of star-shot jelly, a substance popularly believed to be given out by falling stars and considered in previous centuries to be imbued with magical properties, though most likely an organic matter produced by amphibians or fungi. Another occasion on which Pryme sought rational explanations in nature for supposedly supernatural occurrences was in response to those who claimed to have encountered luminescent phenomena akin to will-o'-the-wisps. One man believed the lights to be the devil himself and was prepared to fight the apparition. But these claims Pryme dismissed as nothing but the action of light, acting, in his words, on the froth of water. Pryme was eventually elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society, one of the greatest honours of his life. When seeking support for his last great endeavour, writing the history of the drainage of Hatfield Chase and the settlers that undertook it, he listed his credentials for the project as 1, being that he was descended from those first drainers, 2, that he was a commissioner for the sewers, and 3, that he was an FRS. So, moving towards conclusion, Abraham Pryme died in 1704 after falling ill when visiting the sick in his parish of Thorn, when he was just 34. A monumental inscription set up in Hatfield Church alluded to his having been, quote, snatched away in youth's fresh bloom, and we might well wonder what other contributions he might have made to learned society for live longer. That said, his diary provides us with sufficient cause to question the received links between belief in the supernatural and high church Toryism at the turn of the 18th century, and by contrast the association between Whiggism and the embrace of science and a rational Christianity informed by natural philosophy. Samuel Wesley's inherent belief in both ghosts and witches, as evinced by his actions and in print, citing biblical precedents and maintained by his children, especially John Wesley, was clearly not shared by Pryme. That said, Pryme did have moments of credulity which accorded with his particular political beliefs. I'll leave you with a couple of instances of this. He was willing to entertain royalist superstitions from the Civil War, such as the belief that to his own day no grass would grow on the spots where the bodies of Sir Charles Lucas and Sir George Lisle fell at their execution after the siege of Colchester some 50 years earlier. And in 1698, when a mysterious figure called John Midgley arrived in Hull, supposedly on his way to claim an estate in Holland, Pryme invited him to discourse in his private chambers. the diarist thought Midgley, quote, one of the most universal scholars I've ever met with, despite his espousal of theistic and Socinian opinions. Piecing together Midgley's background, it appears that he'd served the Presbyterian congregation in Manchester, whilst also preaching the collegiate church there out of over £100, before leaving on a pretense of a call into the country. Instead, he stole a horse and rode to Hull. After his departure, Pryme dismissed claims that Midgley was in reality a papist or Roman emissary as an invention or trick of the dissenters. On this occasion, Pryme's scholarly inquisitiveness superseded his natural scepticism. I'm going to end there.